What if your next blog post or article, not a memo or a brief, was what brought people to your firm and what brought people to a practice group? Build your practice over a period of time. You're listening to the Real Lawyers podcast. I'm Kevin O'Keefe of LexBlog. This podcast is for lawyers and legal professionals who use blogging and publishing and even podcasting or want to do so to build a name, build relationships, and build a strong book of business. In today's episodes, we'll look at what it really means in practice with a real professional. And who better to be with us than Alan Kaplinsky of Ballard Spahr. What are you doing for Ballard Spahr, Alan?
Okay. Well, first of all, Kevin, a pleasure to be invited on your podcast show.
Thank you.
So
You're welcome.
I, for about 25 years, since I had joined Ballard Spahr, on February 1, 1995 until the end of 2020, 25 years, I was the head of the Consumer Financial Services Group at Ballard Spahr, which is one of the larger practice groups within our firm. And then at the end of 2020, I relinquished being chair of the practice group, withdrew from the partnership, did that to enable younger lawyers within my group to advance to more senior and leadership positions. And I assumed the role of senior counsel to the Consumer Financial Services Group. And in addition to still servicing clients, one of my principal functions has been now for almost 5 years managing our blog, our weekly podcast show, and regular webinars that we produce.
Yes, you're in charge of the mass media for this group.
Yeah, for this group. Yes, exactly.
I mean, rather than talk about what your practice might be, let's talk about how this all came about. It's reached the point, obviously, where it's a very significant part of your job, where you're running this mass media for the group. How did this all start? I mean, as far as going from being a lawyer to now saying, okay, I'm going to broadcast, publish,
Okay.
it's something a little bit different than the typical lawyer does.
So I've always liked public speaking. I've always thought that it was a part of practicing law that excited me. And very early in my career, I would accept practically any and all invitations to do public speaking. And I, from time to time, would be invited to be on radio shows to talk about legal issues, sometimes even TV shows. And then Philadelphia Magazine, one time, used to actually every year come out with what was called the Best Lawyers edition in Philadelphia. And they named me as the top banking lawyer in Philadelphia. Now, that was in 1994, a long time ago. I didn't think much of it. It was a nice little honor to get at the time. But then one day I got a call from a talk radio station in Philadelphia. And they mentioned how I was named in Philadelphia Magazine. And one of the things that they had asked me and that appeared in Philadelphia Magazine, they said, if you didn't become a lawyer, what would you have done? Would you have gone into another career? And I said, I'd be a radio talk show host. So they then said that one of their hosts on a program that appeared at night, I think from 7 to 10 p.m., was going to be on vacation and would I like to stand in for him? And not realizing at the time what was involved in actually running a radio talk show, I think I very foolishly accepted that position. And I did it. While it was a lot of fun, it wasn't as easy as I thought because we were taking calls from, the people in the audience. And then to top it off, one of my kids
I was just going to ask you about kids.
Yeah. They thought that would be very funny. But I've always enjoyed, as I said, public speaking. And when Congress enacted the Dodd-Frank Act, and I remember the date very well because it's very etched in my mind because it has significance for our blog. It was on July 21, 2010. I recognize that as a landmark, a watershed moment, I guess is really the best way to put it. That was a real opportunity for me to take our consumer financial services group, which had done very well financially, but which had not grown a great deal. I was always a little bit reluctant and nervous about hiring too many people too quickly, because one of the biggest fears that I had was that their plates wouldn't be 100% full at all times. The holy grail in a law firm is billable hours. So I worried about that, probably in retrospect, much too much. But I saw the NAP and a Dodd-Frank, and in particular, the portion of Dodd-Frank that created the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau as really being this watershed. And it was like something being handed to me on a plate. I could only have dreamt that Congress would have handed me such a gift that time. It wasn't much of a gift for my clients, on the other hand, but it certainly created an incredible amount of legal work. And you could say in a very methodical and a very cautious way, I began to grow our group, doing really a lot of hiring like we had never done before. And then I came up with this idea of doing a blog. And also at that time, I got approached by a lawyer in our group who was tired of doing client work. She thought clients were pesky and she just didn't like, just getting tired of doing it. This is a very experienced consumer financial services lawyer. And she said, I don't want to really do client work anymore. What I would really like to do is to get involved in writing for a blog. And I told her this was something I had been thinking of, and she was very enthusiastic about it.
What made you first think of a blog? What made you all of a sudden, you're hearing about these things?
Well, yeah. I mean, we're talking about 2010. Blogging was not nearly as prevalent as it is today.
Right.
And there weren't that many law firms that were doing it.
Right.
And in my area of law, there weren't any. And our firm at that time didn't have a blog and wasn't even thinking about a blog. So I told the chief marketing officer about my idea, and she went to bat for me with the then chairman of our firm, who was dead set against doing a blog because it was considered to be unprofessional, unseemly. How are you going to control what people were writing on the blog? And didn't want to do it. But to the credit of the CMO, eventually the chair of the firm agreed that we could launch a blog, the very first at our firm, subject to a number of constraints. With there were too many cooks in the kitchen, I guess, making the broth, too many levels of approval, and it was making it difficult and too difficult to, on a timely basis, write articles and get them published.
Who was the CMO then?
What's that?
Who was the CMO then?
I don't even remember her name. She's left the firm, a long time ago, and I'm terrible with names, but she was extremely helpful. We got it approved. It worked very well, and we did it, I think, from a marketing standpoint. What we did, and I don't mean to toot my own horn, but I think the timing couldn't have been better. Dodd-Frank was enacted July 21, 2010. It created the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, or I'll refer to as the CFPB, but there was a 1-year lag. The Bureau would not actually become operational until July 21, 2011. That gave us a year to do all the planning for the blog. We had to find a software platform. We had to put together a protocol, what kinds of approvals would be needed, how to deal with conflicts of interest, et cetera, et cetera. And on the very same day that the CFPB became operational, we launched our blog with a lot of fanfare. And right after that, there was a meeting of the American Bar Association Committee on Consumer Financial Services. A lot of potential clients were there. And our marketing department had created buttons that all the people in our firm wore to that meeting that said, "Ask me about our blog." And we handed out leaflets. We were the very first blog in the consumer financial services area to get launched. A few other firms, maybe it was more than a few, tried to emulate what we did, but failed. They couldn't do it, and they couldn't do it because they didn't devote the resources and didn't have the kinds of policies that you need for a blog to be successful. So, what do I mean? Well, we were very fortunate at the time, and now we've shifted to sort of a new way of producing articles. But at that time, we had a very experienced lawyer who stayed on top of everything going on in the industry, who was a fabulous writer. And she would identify developments and write up blogs and circulate them around a small group in our firm. And we might do some editing. We typically didn't have to do a lot, and we get them out. And so if the development occurred in a certain day, we'd get something out toward the end of that day, or worst case scenario, the following day. And we were regular. That is, we would publish not just one blog a day, but we might have 3 or 4, or sometimes even more blogs a day when there was
And
a
what
lot going on.
and what there may only be a handful of the blogs on our platform that publish that much, but the ones that do have recognized the financial return that they're receiving. So
Right.
it wasn't for the social good that we decided to assign a full-time person to write about the blog.
Yeah.
We realized we had a practice group, and I'm assuming you realize that that practice group needs to be fueled by business, and this blog certainly isn't hurting by doing that. I mean,
Exactly.
how were you so confident? Because I can only imagine if I told this to another firm right now and played that story, that managing partner would go, "There is no way we're going to have a lawyer write full time for a
Yeah.
blog."
Yeah.
How are you
Yeah.
so sure and so passionate that that
Yeah.
works?
Yeah. Well, number one, this particular lawyer was not full time. She worked actually 3 days a week, but
Okay,
that was enough. That's all.
okay,
That's what we need. The combination of what she could do in 3 days and what the rest of us could do to fill in was
right,
enough to keep the blog
going.
populated with a
Yeah,
lot of articles. And the other key point, Kevin, that I think a lot of people don't appreciate that are law firms that are doing blogs, it's not enough to just report a development. You can read about that if it's an important development. You can read about it in any newspaper. The New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the American Banker in our
right,
case. We have to add some value. And so that means we've got to report not just that a certain development occurred, but what it means to a company or a bank that is engaged in a certain kind of practice or wants to develop a certain kind of product. And we would always have, even though we didn't label them as takeaways, okay, which a lot of law firms do now, in effect, that's what they were. There was analysis that went along with the reporting on the development. And that's what set our blog apart, I think, from a lot of the other blogs that didn't make it. And the regularity, the fact, I mean, there would never be a day that would go by without at least one blog being published. And we were monitoring what our competition was doing. And we knew that we didn't really have any competition because they would publish something and then maybe a week later something else would get published. Well, you're not gonna develop a following. I mean, what happened with our blog is we were the first. It came out with something that was very high quality. We didn't know a lot about blogging at the time. I mean, I had never done it. Nobody else in our firm had done it, but we learned on the job. And I had a lot of prior success in marketing our practice group, but through not online, through conventional methods like going out and giving a speech somewhere or writing an article that would get published in some law review or something like that. But I felt, based on the other experience I had in offline environment, that the same thing would work online. When I used to give speeches, I would talk about the importance of this development. These are the takeaways. Did the same thing with our blog. And honestly, we just blew away the competition.
For those lawyers that apply themselves and have the vision, it works. I mean, I
Yeah.
remember Francis Pileggi that was over at Fox Rothschild at the time, and he called me up, I don't know, 2006 or 7, and he said, "I don't know anything about this blog thing, but I speak and I enjoy that. I write some articles and I enjoy that." And when the firm asks me how I get my work, they say, I speak and I write, and they go, "How do you know you get your work that way?" He goes, "I don't know that, but it seems to come."
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he goes, "I enjoy it and I meet people."
Yeah. Right.
Blog that you've been doing this long. I mean, if you had to go tell, a CMO of another major firm and say, could this thing really work if we sunk our teeth into it, if we were passionate about a particular subject and we already had good lawyers in it? I mean, what would you tell
Well, what I would say to
them?
him is,
Or
you
her? Yep.
have a practice group, because it's going to be very unlikely that I'd be able to convince another law firm the way I was able to convince our firm to hire a lawyer full time. Now we don't have that. The lawyer that we had retired a couple of years ago, but we hired a non-lawyer journalist to help us out. And the journalist is able to do the reporting on the development, which is
Right.
what a journalist is able to do. But then we have a small group of other lawyers who review what the journalist did, and we add the analysis. Before, when we had this lawyer who worked full time on the thing, she would do the analysis and we didn't have to add very much. But to get back to your question, you got to have a commitment of not just the practice group, but a commitment of the firm and the marketing department to do it, and to do it right. And to do it right, you've got to have some method of getting content. First of all, monitoring what's going on in the industry, separating the wheat from the chaff. You can't write about everything that's happening. And number one, there aren't that many things that happen each day that are that important to write
Right.
about. You've got a limited resources. It's not unlimited. I mean, even in our case, it wasn't like we could do anything we wanted, but you've got to have that commitment, and you have to have a method set up for allocating responsibility, for people being responsible. Maybe you do hire a journalist, like, we do now. But even if you don't have a journalist, you've got to have the lawyers. And by the lawyers, I don't mean just the associates. You got to have the partners committed to it as well. A blog isn't something that just gets delegated to low-level associates and you let it go. First of all, they don't have the experience or the expertise to handle that. But second of all, if you don't have the commitment right from the top and it doesn't filter through the leadership of the practice group, it isn't going to work. You
Yeah.
got to be really committed to it, and you've got to be regular. You can't let it sort of just, have it hang out there, because if it's not active, people are no longer going to look at your blog. They're going to say, "Oh, that's worthless."
I wanted to ask you a couple other questions. I mean,
Yeah,
your blog is set up like, it's like its own magazine, digital magazine. It's not
right,
it's not buried inside the website as having articles in the
right,
website. How
correct. We have
does that
our own, it's called consumerfinancemonitor.com.
Right. And to me, that seems really, it always seemed important right off the get-go with blogs
Right.
for lawyers that they were going to have a publication that was right out there, standalone, and could be recognized by potential clients and the media and whatnot, as these guys publish on it. It's not
Right.
just marketing inside of a website to try to
Right.
garner traffic. I don't know how you look at that. I'm curious.
Yeah, well, you've got to make it, first of all, very easy for for people to look at your blog.
Okay, right,
I mean, we have subscribers, a lot of
right,
subscribers to our blog, and it's grown year after year and month after month. We keep growing the subscription base. And what's happened, the reason for that is number one, word of mouth, gets out that we really do a good job in the consumer finance area. But we've really been helped a lot by the development of fintech because what's happened, it's brought a whole new potential audience for our blog or potential readers for our blog
right,
and also our podcast show. People that we didn't know. I mean, when I got started in this industry a long time ago, back in the 70s, I think I knew every lawyer in the country that practiced in this area, both in-house and outside counsel. Today, I couldn't even come close to knowing all of the people because there are a lot of lawyers who are involved in tech, and they're very, very savvy when it comes to the internet and blogging and social media, et cetera. And consumer financial services law is something that they've learned because they had to learn it because their company wasn't just an internet company. A lot of them were involved in making loans or their banks accepting deposits or their
my guess is they know, my guess,
well, that's the point. But it's not just that they know me, that it's really more important that they know our blog.
you
And
know, you
we do whatever we can to, to publicize that. When we're always trying to increase readership, because
how,
what that means is there are more potential clients that will come our way who didn't know about us.
and as
Yeah,
far as, right,
it's incredible. I mean, it's just there is absolutely no doubt that our investment, whatever it has been paid off many, many times over. The problem that a lot of firms have is they're trying too hard to find a financial connection or a new client or a new matter, for every article that gets written in a blog or any podcast show that we put on. That's just, in my view, absurd. That's not the principal thing you look at. A lot of times we can do that. I mean, a lot of times somebody will come to me or another lawyer in our group and say, so and so wrote an article on your blog about a particular development, and we've got the same problem. Can you help us?
right,
Or we have just got sued by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau or the Federal Trade Commission or a state attorney general. And we know from your blog, you write a lot about everything that's going on at all those agencies. Do you have anybody that could, defend that matter? Or it could be a class action lawsuit. So a lot of times there is a direct one-to-one relationship, or sometimes, the people that are reading our blog are clients of ours already. But, we're always talking about different things. And they might come to us and say, you mentioned such and such on your blog. And we just, we're beginning to look at getting involved in a particular product. So, but the main thing, it is, I've got to emphasize, if you look at it in that kind of a mercenary way, that's what I'm going to call it, mercenary, you're barking up the wrong tree. You've got to look at it as a long-term investment. It's not immediately going to result in dividends as soon as you launch something. You've got to build an audience, and that takes time. And you've got to be patient, and you've got to understand that you're building a brand and you're building something that's new, that hasn't your group hasn't done before. You want to be known as being a thought leader in the area, and the more you can. And that's why, by the way, we did launch our podcast show 8 years ago. It's a little more than 8 years. We said, even though we knew it would require a hell of a lot of work, we said it had to be a weekly show.
right.
And not too many law firms do that because that requires a lot of time, and those
Let me
things
ask you
don't
a question
happen.
about the let me ask you about the podcast, and one
Yeah,
question before that. I'm assuming then your firm isn't dictated by, can you show us the analytics for this week from your blog or your podcast so we can decide whether we're going to continue
yeah,
with it? I mean,
yeah.
I'm assuming that's not what I've got firms
Well,
right now that
we
you
have
have
the
the analytics,
metrics.
but
Yeah, I mean, we know, for example, with the podcast, how many downloads we get.
right,
We issue a new podcast show, and they're pre-recorded. Every
right.
Thursday, we release one. Sometimes we'll do two a week. If there's some like really
Who does
important development, we'll issue a special edition of our episode of our podcast show.
why a podcast? You had a really successful blog. And all
I'll
of a
tell
sudden
you,
you're going to say, all of a sudden, okay, we're going to do a podcast
yeah,
now.
all right. I'm always
And I'm
looking,
sure somebody's thinking that this is getting real crazy.
Kevin. I've been in this game a long time. Despite that, have always part of the law that enjoy a lot is developing business. I find that to be very rewarding, always have. And to this day, I still find it rewarding, even though my principal function these days is not to service clients. I do, some of that, but my principal function, as I told you, is to deal with managing our digital media.
Right.
So what happened is a funny story how we started. At least I think it's funny. Hopefully you'll laugh when you hear it. So I one day was having a conversation with one of my sons, my youngest son, and this probably took place about 9 or 10 years ago. And I was bragging to him about our blog and how successful it has been, and how we've developed a lot of business from it, and how much fun it is to do it. And then he was the one that said to me, "Who's your market? Who are you trying to? What are the demographics?" He had just gotten his MBA, and so he was very curious about some of the same questions that the our law firm has had, or any firm would have. And I said, we're trying to appeal to anybody who's in the consumer financial services business, mostly in-house counsel. We're not trying to appeal to competing law firms. Although, by the way, just let me mention as a quick footnote, we allow on our podcast show, anybody can listen in on the podcast show. Same thing with our webinars. We used to spend hours of time vetting our lists, keeping all the competition out, keeping consumer lawyers out, keeping government attorneys out. And after a while, we just decided that's a big waste of time, because the people really want to get a hold of what you did, they'll be able to get it. And we're consuming an inordinate amount of time doing that. But anyway, to get back to my son said, "Are you trying to appeal to younger people, younger businessmen that are working for banks?" And I said, "Well, of course we are. This is, we're trying to appeal to anybody." And he said, "I don't think you're going to do it only with a blog." He said, "Why don't you have a podcast show?" And honestly, that was the first time I really thought about that. Shame on me. I should have thought about it earlier, but that's what prompted me to look into podcasting, and went to,
Smart of you. I turned it down for 10 years.
yeah, and then of course, as I mentioned to you, always got a lot of enjoyment out of public speaking, being on radio, TV, and so it had an appeal to me, quite apart from the fact that it could generate additional work for our firm and our practice group. But in any event, we had to start the process all over again, getting the approval of because our firm didn't have any other podcast shows at that time. Um, and we were the first, as we were with the blog. Then after other practice groups saw how our blog was doing, we now have a few other blogs that are out there. The podcast shows there's our blog, and then there's something called Better Business, which is sort of a blog that deals with everything other than consumer finance. It draws its content from every other practice group in the firm except for our practice group because we have our own podcast show. But anyway, it took us, I would say, almost a year to get it off the ground because, again, we had to find people. We had to recruit somebody that could handle the technical part of it. And that took time because there weren't a lot of people that time that were doing podcasting. Today is, of course, completely different. And we had to decide on a name. We had to decide, what platforms we would use, what platform we would use for recording, and then where did we want it to appear. And so it took time, did it. Uh, the fact that we already had a very popular blog prompted me to believe we ought to name our podcast show, give it the same name. And so we call that Consumer Finance Monitor. It used to be called CFP. Our blog used to be called CFPB Monitor, but we changed that with Trump 1.0 because we believed at that time that there wouldn't be a lot going on at the CFPB during his term of office. And we wanted our blog not to be tied to developments at one agency. We wanted to cover the waterfront in the consumer finance industry. And so we changed the name.
Who does the podcast? I mean, who is the host? Who are the guests? How do you do it?
I am generally almost always the host.
Okay.
It wasn't that way at the beginning. Shared the responsibility with another lawyer who ended up leaving the firm, and there was nobody that had experience in podcasting at that time other than me. And then as I assumed my new role as senior counsel, I had time to do it. And I enjoyed it, which is the other important thing. So other than the technical part of it, we have a recording engineer who handles that part of it. And they're always involved in every podcast show. But I identified the topics. I identified the potential guests and speakers who are often not people within our firm. They're very well-known people that I'm able to recruit to come on the show. A lot of them either know me or know of me and know about our podcast show. And I mean, I've had dozens and dozens of academics who are the leaders in their field and people, even I'll put on consumer advocates, the people who, might be considered our adversaries by the industry that we represent. But again, I've always felt it's better to find out what they're thinking than to ignore them altogether. And sometimes in order to create an interesting podcast show, I like to have more than one person. I like at least two people who don't necessarily agree with one another.
Interesting.
And I love a dialogue. I love interaction. And part of it is we are in the entertainment business to some extent. That you want people to like your show, and they're not going to like it if it's just some boring show where somebody's making a presentation. It's not going to be terrible.
How long is each episode?
It varies. And I guess one of the things I could say, and this is something I always feel I have to work on. I always say a half hour to an hour, but I would say most of them are closer to an hour than a half hour.
Yeah.
And it's because, I plan the show, I know in advance the topics I'm going to cover. You might say, well, how do I know that? Well, not that difficult.
No.
Actually, I mean, I'm generally knowledgeable about a lot of areas in the consumer finance industry, but I tap into the knowledge of my guests, and I do it in a very simple way. I say to them, create for me a list of topics or questions that you would like me to pose questions to you about, and I'll get something from them, and then I'll tinker with it and maybe edit it a little bit, and we'll finally agree generally on what the agenda that we're going to follow. And I do that, but I don't become a slave to that agenda, because the key to a successful podcast show is to make it a discussion, to make it interactive. I say whenever I've got a new guest, I had one recorded a show yesterday, and the guest said, "This is my first podcast show. What should you tell me? What should I know?" And I said, "You're just having a conversation with me, and
Yeah.
that's all. You know how to have a conversation, and don't even think about how many people are listening to you. I'm going to ask you questions that you're already knowledgeable about. You shouldn't worry. You know, if you make a mistake, and that happens from time to time, we can edit over that because this is not a live program."
But
But
listening to you from where we started, said this whole thing started, whether it was the blog or the podcast, and you said, if you weren't a lawyer, you wanted to be, like a talk radio host. And
yeah,
I wanted to be a lawyer. I wasn't the brightest person in the room, and somehow they got me through college and through law school. But the greatest thing that I thought of being able to do was to work one of those late night radio things out in the swamp with the antenna, where you took the calls from the people,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Or you
Yeah,
had
right,
guests. And
right,
I also thought the newspaper was a pretty fascinating place too, in a small town of 50,000 people. To be
right,
able to go down to the newspaper and maybe be quoted on something,
right, right,
um, or write up something
right,
that was in it. And it wasn't until people pounded on me to do a podcast 15 years ago, and I said, I don't really know what I'm doing. I don't listen to them. I don't watch them, and I love it. I've been doing it it's been great. And I understand, in addition to the blog podcasts, that you also do webinars, and you do them in a unique fashion. How is that?
right. Well, the webinars are, of course, a live event, unlike a
Right.
podcast show, which is pre-recorded. And so there's a video component and an audio component. I've been doing webinars for years, and our practice group does more webinars by far than any other practice group in our firm. I would guess we do probably close to 20 a year. And we started out doing what I would call conventional webinars where slides were almost more important than what the speakers were talking about. I remember seeing slides whenever I would be in the audience of a webinar, any kind of a webinar, and it would drive me nuts. It would not only be a slide, but it would be a slide with hundreds and hundreds of words of content on one slide, so that it'd be impossible to read the slide and also listen to what the speaker is talking about. So about a year and a half ago, I experimented with what I'd call a new kind of product. It's still a webinar. It's still video, audio, it's live, but the slides have a secondary role. I will put up a slide with an agenda. It will be one slide just mentioning a list of the topics we're going to cover and who is going to talk about the topic. That's it. We also, because of CLE requirements, you have to provide written material in connection with the webinar. And we give CLE credit to all lawyers. And so we've got to have written material, but the written material doesn't have to be slides. It can be supplemental material. So what I have done is to take our approach to podcasting, which is something where it's not tied to slides and it's not formal presentations, but more of a conversation among people, often people with diverse points of view. And I've done that time and time again. I've had as many as 5 or 6 people on a webinar with, it takes more to plan it. It's more complicated to plan because you got to decide who's going to talk about each subject. Someone's got to take the lead on a particular topic. But usually what we do is we in advance designate somebody to take the lead, and then the rest of the panelists will then chime in, and they'll say, well, let me add to this and let me add to that. And it creates a much more entertaining, again, I use that word, but I think really much more informative and useful webinar than the conventional webinar.
Yeah, and you didn't have to have the people as guests having to fly to Las Vegas to sit on white chairs and be asked by the moderator
Right,
some questions.
right,
No, it really,
right.
I mean,
Yeah,
they're sitting there and they're looking at a screen with what, 5 people on split views,
yeah, yes,
going
that's
through it.
it. Yeah, everything is
And
all remote, of course,
right,
and people are
yeah,
in different locations. And so, it does require planning and coordination, but I have found it very valuable. And, this is another point I guess I should make. And that is, I view marketing in a law firm as being a mosaic. I mean, I sometimes call it a marketing mosaic. It's got a lot of different pieces that you want to put together. The blog is part of it, the podcast show, the webinars, but also social media, LinkedIn. I'm going to use LinkedIn a lot. And I encourage our other people in our group to do it. I don't think enough lawyers use it. It's extremely valuable in increasing your audience, and you can use it to promote webinars that you're doing, to promote what I'm beginning to do now. This is sort of new. In the past, I have promoted a podcast after we released a show. Every Thursday, put something on our blog. The firm will put something on LinkedIn and X, and that would be it. Now, and part of the reason I did that is I never knew for sure when we would release a particular podcast show because I have a queue. I mean, I have people have said to me, how do you must go nuts from week to week. You've got to have a show planned and, it must be, and you're doing it all yourself. You got to get speakers. Well, I don't it's not hand to mouth. This is something where I do the planning sometimes months in advance, and I put shows on the shelf and I have a queue, and the queue could basically take me through February if I wanted it to. Without my planning another podcast show, I could do that. But what we're going to do is when we get closer to the release date of a podcast show, we're going to start promoting it in advance, not wait to the release date. Put something
that's
on our blog, put something on social media. I should have started that long ago. But, you live and learn. But I'm always looking for new ideas, things that, haven't been done before.
you're a gift to the firm, and
Well,
not
thank
just
you.
to the firm, but in other lawyers that will look at you as a mentor in that capacity. That you can look at things differently than the way things are being done by other people. You're a breath of fresh air for me. I have been in this space since 2004, and it was started by originally the smaller firms jumped in, or one individual lawyer in a large firm,
Right,
and then maybe after about 5+ years, large firms started coming in for multiple
right.
publications. But today, content marketing has become the word. It's not been publishing, it's not been blogging, it's not been podcasting. And it often comes down to deleting pieces of content that are more than 6 years old because that hurts our search engine rankings on the website.
Yeah.
We have to buy this service, which is going to measure the amount of analytics that everybody
Mm-hmm.
gets, and we have to
Right.
make decisions based on that. The whole connecting with people through publishing and networking through the internet is what I might call it. Seems has been lost in many places. So
Mm-hmm.
keep alive what you're doing, and we'll certainly
Well,
share what
thank you.
you've shared with other people. And I wish younger lawyers would understand that.
I do too, Kevin. It's sometimes surprisingly, it can be a hard sell for younger lawyers. And I think part of the problem lies with the law firms not providing billable hour credit or other
Right.
credit it's considered an extracurricular activity.
Okay.
You want the younger
Right.
lawyers to learn how to develop business, learn that in law school generally. And what better way to do it than through digital media? When I started my career, there was no internet. So it took much more of an effort. You did a lot of traveling, and it absorbed much more time than it does today. So it's really a great way for a young lawyer to essentially develop a reputation, develop as being a thought leader, being an expert in a particular area. But younger lawyers are also told you got to meet certain goals in terms of billable hours credit. And they're weighing these things. If I don't bill enough time, I may not even be at the firm. Because people are look at that. They look at it very carefully, look at it every month. So they don't see the immediate, they're always looking for an immediate payback on something without realizing that they're investing in themselves. That's really the key.
The firms need to look at it though too. I mean, now they have to have somebody like you that's gung-ho that I want to do it. And your chief marketing officer said, okay, but the firms are putting in millions and millions of dollars into internet marketing.
Yeah.
The problem as I see it is the way they're doing it through content marketing as opposed to building a name through publishing.
Yeah.
Isn't bringing them the returns.
Right. Right.
And so their lawyers aren't building names. They might be building analytics.
Right.
And people ultimately don't look at the revenues. But anyway, we could talk about this all day.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Well, thank you very much for being on. It's been a pleasure and my honor to have you on.
Well, and it's been a pleasure being on your show. Your company performs a terrific function. I look at what you publish every day, and I do it often just to see what other law firms are reporting about and to make sure we haven't missed anything that's important. So that's a very useful service, for sure.
Yeah, we'll welcome your feedback as we span some things into more of a library format so that we can get all the publication that's going on by lawyers and into different areas beyond what we even have now.
Right.
But anyway, that's it for today's episode of the Real Lawyers Podcast. If you enjoy the conversation, be sure to follow or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and share it with another lawyer who cares about their craft. The Real Lawyers Podcast is brought to you by LexBlog, helping lawyers publish with purpose and build a name that matters. I'm Kevin O'Keefe. Thanks for listening. Thanks, Alan. And I'll see you next time.
Yeah, thank you.